For the political science department, I think it's a great honor for those of us on the committee that this is such a timely issue that we're dealing with in our first colloquium. And I would like to ask Professor Noelani Bigger-Kalpoa to come up and introduce all the speakers for this
Mahalo to Tuti and the other grad students who are part of the colloquium committee, which is being headed this semester by Professor Jairus Grove, but he's on a trip, so he's unable to be here. So for today, we're really honored to have these three panelists come and speak with us. It's been argued that there is no element more central to power and politics in Hawaii than land, and we have a really important, but I think under-discussed issue, the Public Lands Development Corporation, up for discussion today. And so we have three great panelists who are going to give us some historical context as well as some important analysis of this issue, partially in preparation for those of us who are interested in going to the final hearing that they're having on the PLDC's administrative rules tomorrow night at 6 p.m. at the Kalani Moku building. So if you're interested, there's more information on the table. So we'd like to welcome our three panelists. The first is Derek Kawanoi, who is a graduate of Richardson Law School here at the University of Hawaii, where he specialized in Native Hawaiian law. While in law school, Derek was also an alaka'i of Ahahui o Hawaii, president of the Hawaiian Society of Law and Politics, and captain of the Native American Moot Court team. He is now the Student and Community Outreach Coordinator for Kahuliao Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law, and this fall we are also proud to welcome Derek as a new PhD student in political science. Then we will have Jocelyn Doan, who, like Derek, is a graduate of Richardson Law School. She currently works as the Senior Public Policy Advocate for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and prior to working at OHA, Jocelyn was also a Kahuliao Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law post-JD Research Fellow. She was a founding member of Huku'aina, a coalition that was formed to protect Hawaii's ceded lands from being sold before the resolution of Native Hawaiian land claims, and we're very happy to have Jocelyn with us today. And then last, we have Dr. Kamano Maikalani Beamer, and UH Manoa is fortunate to have him joining our faculty this fall. He's an assistant professor in the Hui'aina Momona program, where he works jointly between Hawaiian Studies, or the School of Hawaiian Knowledge, and the law school. Professor Beamer received his PhD in Cultural Geography from UH Manoa in 2008, and then he was a Mellon Hawaii postdoctoral fellow, during which time he completed his forthcoming book, look for it soon, No Mako Kamana, Liberating the Nation, impressed with Kamehameha Publications. His research focuses on Indigenous agency, Native Hawaiian land tenure, and the land and resource law of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And this semester, Professor Beamer is teaching a course titled, What are the Ceded Lands and How Do We Manage Them? So please join me in welcoming our wonderful Let me also say real quickly on the format. We wanted to have each of the panelists speak for around 10 minutes and then have a good amount of time for discussion and questions as well. So we'll go in the order that I introduced them, and then we'll open for more discussion and questions.
I just want to interject that you probably noticed that there are two people videotaping. One is Pono Size, which is going to go on YouTube, and
you win.
And so if there's any objections to being videotaped, just let these gentlemen know and they will not videotape you, right?
I don't have any objections, but I have to say, Mr. Lynn, it's nice to meet you. I've read your blog. I've always wondered what you look like. But yeah, thanks. We were wondering who the person in the blush on the camera is. So I generally don't have any objections to recording. My only concern is that it not be edited in a way that, that's generally inappropriate. So I think we've talked to one person about that. So that's my only concern. Thank you everybody for coming, and thank you to the people who helped to organize this. I feel kind of weird about being here because the three of us are all to some degree affiliated with Kahuya Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law. Although Kamana has come to the university through the Hui Ainimona program, he spends a portion of his time at the law school and then the other portion basically at Hawaiian studies. Right? So I don't know exactly. I don't want people to feel like it's one-sided. I haven't talked to Kamana substantively in terms of what he's going to be presenting today, but we're all generally excited to be here. Okay, sorry. I'm going to really kind of, I hope I can do this in 10 minutes, but generally ask, why does the PLDC matter? How many of you are familiar with the PLDC, even just remotely? Okay. The PLDC matters to me when Professor Vidya Kaupua gave the introduction of Jocelyn. Jocelyn was described as a co-founding member of the Kukuwaina Coalition. I was one of the other co-founding members also, along with one other law student. And we met with other people within the community, people like Esther Kiaina, Dr. Nicolau Kamehlehiva, about what we could do. And so why the PLDC matters, I'm kind of going to be talking about why it mattered to us, or why it matters to us, and how this kind of relates to the founding of the Kukuwaina Coalition. So like it was discussed, our goal with the Kukuwaina Coalition was to do what we could to protect the ceded lands from being sold. Why does the PLDC matter? Well, back in November 2008, there were hundreds of people who went to the Capitol and they they spoke out against Governor Lingle wanting to take a Supreme Court case from the Hawaii Supreme Court to the United States Supreme Court. I thought it was an amazing show of solidarity organized in a limited amount of time. A good amount of people came. You can kind of get a better idea here. But even without that, behind the camera, there were even more people who came. We got a lot of support from different people in the community. Kamehameha Schools provided us buses to bring university students to the Capitol because they saw how harmful taking the case to the U.S. Supreme Court could be if we got an adverse decision. So what was that case about? There was a really old case that kind of surprised people when the Supreme Court finally took up the issue. There was an issue of ceded lands, and during the number of years ago, in the 90s, there was an effort by the state to sell parcels of land. But these lands were considered, or were among what's been described as the ceded lands. I know that some people have issues with that particular word. They'd rather call it seized, stolen. I think just the history behind ceded in the context of Hawaii and the way we understand, I think ceded includes those terms. So hopefully I won't offend anybody by using the term ceded lands, but I'll use it just because it's kind of consistent with how it's been used in the legal world. But anyway, in that Supreme Court decision, the state Supreme Court basically held that the state of Hawaii has a fiduciary duty to preserve the corpus of the public lands trust, specifically the ceded lands, until such time as the unrelinquished claims of the Native Hawaiians have been resolved. Now, I didn't change the actual wording there, but the actual, there were a few words that came before the quoted language, and that was, the Supreme Court said that the apology resolution from 1993 and state law recognized that there was this fiduciary duty. Now I took out that language because when the legal administration took up this case to the U.S. Supreme Court, the Supreme Court disagreed, the U.S. Supreme Court disagreed with the Hawaii Supreme Court. Kind of. There's been a lot of misunderstanding in regards to what happened with that lawsuit. The Supreme Court did agree with the Attorney General on the point that federal law, the apology bill, could not encumber the state's title, and that was it. Now, after the case, after the opinion came up, the Attorney General said he won, which on that point he did. But if you look at the transcripts of the oral arguments, and even in the actual opinion, the court was very worried, and they would not say that state law couldn't prevent the state from recognizing that they have a fiduciary duty. So if you're familiar with constitutional law, there's times when the U.S. Supreme Court cannot undo a state Supreme Court's law. There's only very limited circumstances in when that could happen. But basically, during the oral arguments, even Samuel Alito had asked him if the state could, have any type of moratorium. Could they, on themselves, say, there's some issues with this, we're not going to do that. And he said yes, they could do that. And so that's when the Supreme Court basically, recognized that even though the apology bill does not create any right to Native Hawaiians for these lands within the state government, and we think that, based on the oral argument part, that Samuel Alito was keeping up with what was happening here in Hawaii. Once we knew that the governor was going to take this case up, the next thing that you try to do is see what you can do legislatively. And so that's what we did. So with Pupuaina, we tried to build up resistance towards the governor's actions, and then when that didn't work, our next step was working through the legislature. So that's basically how this kind of relates back. Now for us, it was important going back to what the state Supreme Court said. So I thought this might kind of summarize in much easier language to understand, but basically they said that the state can't sell or transfer without resolving Native Hawaiian claims. They can't sell or transfer lands without resolving those claims. The state Supreme Court recognized that when we look at state law, what the various types of statutes and policies that our state government had enacted was that there is this general consensus that we're working towards this idea of reconciliation with Native Hawaiians for these past wrongs. Now, recognizing that, they also acknowledge that there's going to, in the process of reconciliation, there's going to be some negotiations. When you look at other indigenous communities in the U.S. where there were land issues, especially, I think it was in Maine, you had primarily two Indian communities, Native communities, that had very strong claims to land. I think it was the Penobscots or the Passamaquoddy that were said to have really 2/3 title to the lands in Maine. And that was going to become a nightmare because you had private landowners who lived on those lands and commercial interests that kind of helped to stimulate the economy. And so the negotiations that tribe ended up working out was, you're going to give us a bunch of money and we're going to forego our claims. That was a decision that the tribe made. I think the belief was that with the money we can better develop our communities. Now, I'm not recommending or even suggesting that that's something that we can do, but the court acknowledging that there is this negotiation process, we can't undercut the leverage that the Native Hawaiian community has. If we know we're going to go to the negotiation table, we can't start giving out the stuff that they're going to use as part of the negotiation, maybe compromise on. So that was the important part of it. And so for us, our concern was that if the governor can sell ceded lands, so-called ceded lands, then what does that mean for us, whether we become an independent state again, or if we agree to some other type of lesser sovereignty? It's going to pretty much undercut our efforts, whatever we do. And so these are the people who listen to these oral arguments. It's not too often that you have a unanimous decision, but in that case, that was taken up to them. It was unanimous. I think we kind of had a general idea, just because we studied this. We studied this stuff in law school. That this guy, the Chief Justice, Clarence Thomas Alito, and Scalia. People used to call him Scalito because he kind of takes on this, the perspective that Scalia takes on. But these guys are recognized as Federalists, and so when you look at this idea of what the Supreme Court said, and looking at all the state laws, we felt pretty comfortable that going up to the Supreme Court, that they would say, Mr. Bennett, you're right on this federal issue. But we're federalists, and we believe in states' rights and states' authority. And if the state of Hawaii wants to say, we got this title from the United States, whatever type of title that is, good or bad, that the state does have this ability to restrain itself, or want to put any type of moratorium or limit on it. So, like I said, after we failed to kind of stop the government from taking this to the Supreme Court, we started to work on legislation. Now, there are a number of bills that went through. The one that actually succeeded in passing became Act 176. It was passed in the legislature in 2009, and although it wasn't our most ideal bill, or our ideal result, what it did was it required, the state basically said the state cannot sell any ceded lands unless they get 2/3 votes from both houses of our state legislature. Again, it wasn't our ideal result, but given everything that was happening at the time, competing interests, it was the best result that we could get at that time. We felt, comfortable with that as opposed to not having anything come out during that period. And so, about a year ago, last September, after a summer after the Act 55 went into effect, I called a few legislators. In our state Senate, there was only one senator who opposed it. In the House of Representatives, there were many more representatives who opposed it. Senator Leslie Hara was the only state senator who came out against it. He came out against it for environmental concerns. And there's some things that Jocelyn will kind of speak to those concerns. I spoke with Representative Chris Lee on the phone, and he specifically said he was one of our supporters for Act 176. But among the environmental concerns, when he talked with me, a main concern of his was that Act 55 completely undermined what they wanted to do with Act 176. And so I know that Jocelyn has a slide on the powers of the PLDC, but in summary, it's not quite clear if the PLDC has to follow Act 176. So that's one of the things that we're scared about. Back in 2008, 2009, when we got the community mobilized to act, it was amazing how many people called, how many people submitted testimonies, how many people actually came. And one of my concerns is that everything that our community fought hard to accomplish might be undermined by the PLDC.
Aloha, kako. My name is Jocelyn Doan, as Noeleni introduced me. I work at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and before then I worked with Derek at Kahudiao at the law school. I just wanted to thank you guys for this opportunity to share a little bit about what we know about the Public Land Development Corporation, and then to hopefully during dialogue learn a little bit about what you guys know through questions and discussion. So this is generally what I'm going to talk about today. I wanted to provide introduction or background on the Public Land Development Corporation. It's very confusing. The act that created it is 44 pages long. It's not written very well. It's convoluted. There are parts of the act that conflict with other parts, and so this is just an opportunity to talk about what the conclusions that we've come to about what some of it means, and some maybe ongoing confusion about what some of the other provisions mean. Want to talk a little bit about what the Office of Hawaiian Affairs is concerned about, as well as what we've heard our community talk about, why we've decided to focus on administrative roles at this stage, and then what you can do. Because Derek and Davis and I were just 3 law student recent graduates who had way too much to do, but felt compelled, after the US Supreme Court decided that they were going to hear the case, I remember it vividly when it happened. I went to my car, I was at a conference, and I cried because I knew that nothing good could come out of it. And so we decided that, you know, here we are, these three like young Hawaiians, and we're not going to just stand by while, you know, the future for our people is at risk. So I always think that's super important. We want to empower people to do, you know, fulfill their own kuleana and give back to our community and participate. So in a nutshell, the Public Land Development Corporation means that the state, through this newly created corporation, has the authority to bypass established legal safeguards, which we'll go over a little bit more in depth on. So as Derek mentioned, it was created in 2011, and the purpose, the articulated purpose in the statute and act, which is now Hawaii Revised Statute 171C, is to coordinate programs to make optimal use of public land. Whatever, you know, optimal use can be interpreted in multiple ways. Ensure that public land is maintained for the public, and develop an appropriate and culturally sensitive land development program. So all of that sounds fine and dandy, but it depends on where you're sitting. And with the current statute and draft of the rules, it's very difficult to understand what appropriate and culturally sensitive means. The definition of culturally sensitive pretty much says to be culturally sensitive over again, with maybe a couple extra words in there. And so obviously there are ongoing concerns, despite the fact that the purpose of it doesn't sound all that bad. And so, you know, when the legislature passed Act 55, there were some things going on, and so this just provides context for why some legislators may have been supportive or why it was introduced. So, you know, job creation, economic growth. We've had been dealing with significant tax revenue shortfalls. Our state departments were furloughed, which created all kinds of other problems. And the Department of Land and Natural Resources, whose purpose is to malama our resources and our aina, has always been, and in more recent times, even more so, understaffed, underfunded. And so these were kind of the reasons why some, you know, legislators and others in the government, you know, supported the creation of PLDC, because there would be revenue-generating opportunities. And so just to give you a little context about who's sitting on the board, so 3 of the 5 members of the board are sit on the board as because of their positions. William Isla is the director of DLNR, so he's default on the board, as well as Calvert Young, who's the director of finance, and Mary Alice Evans, who actually sits in Richard Lim's seat. William Isla has only really recently been back onto the board. He was originally designated the seat to his deputy director, Kai Kukui, who has since left the department. And so he hasn't been involved up until, well, he hasn't really been involved very much since it started. The other 2 board members are appointed by the Speaker of the House and the Senate President. So they're not vetted through the Senate like most board and commission members are. Usually they have to be confirmed by the Senate, and in this case, the Speaker of the House and the Senate President has appointed these last 2. Robert Bunda is a former senator for the Waihoa area, and Dwayne Priest, who is a very well-known and successful businessman. So, you know, a lot of the concerns arise from the PLDC's powers and exemptions, and so some of the powers are included in this list. They're able to own property. One limitation on that is they aren't able to own property that was owned by the Department of Land and Natural Resources as of last year. But as Mana may talk about, or as we may talk about more in dialogue, you know, the ceded lands are distributed amongst various departments, not just the DLNR. They also are able to dispose of property, and so what that means is sell, exchange, give away, lease, and they also can obtain development rights. So although they can't own lands owned by the Department of Land and Natural Resources, they can obtain development rights over the department's properties. which is subject to the land board's approval. They can get into, they can formulate projects and developments and partner with other government agencies and private developers. So the buzz on the continent is moving towards public-private partnerships. That might be a term that you've heard before. This empowers them to do that. They can own or sell any project, and you know, not entirely related to what the community's primary concerns are, is they're going to be assuming management responsibilities for the smallholders. And so this is the provision in the statute that relates to its exemptions. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but in the gist of it is that they're required to coordinate with county planning departments. So that means they don't need the county planning department's approvals, they have to coordinate. And then, you know, after doing that, their projects are exempt from all laws, so statutes, ordinances, charter provisions, and rules that are related to special improvement district assessments, land use, zoning, construction standards, development, improvement of land and construction. So to me, what pops out automatically is land use and zoning laws. There are also lots of concerns, safety concerns. They're exempt from construction standards, which have gotten some of the labor unions concerned. And so, yeah, so what does this mean? We don't know, really. I mean, we have an idea about some of the laws that they think they're exempt from, including land use laws and zoning laws. But, you know, the language is so confusingly written and broad. To me, it's confusing. And to me, that's problematic, because how are we to know what steps they need to take in order to implement a project? And so what we think it might mean is that they are exempt from laws, or likely exempt from laws, that require community input, protection of traditional and customary rights, including the natural and cultural resources that our people rely upon, and protection of the environment, which is scary. And so in the best case scenario, the Public Land Development Corporation could undertake to do responsible, streamlined, appropriate, efficient, public-supported, culturally sensitive development. And you know, and if they do, and if that is the case, then you know, we may not have anything to grumble about. But what is the worst case scenario? They can build nearly anything, anywhere. And so land use laws, you know, it took me a while. It wasn't until after law school that I began to understand a little bit more about what that means. So the state's pretty much distributed into 4 different land use districts: urban, rural, conservation, and agriculture. And so each district has their own rules about what you can or cannot do on it. You could assume what agriculture, the purpose of agricultural land is supposed to be. So if you want to build a hotel, for example, on conservation land or on agricultural lands, you usually need to go and get a land use district boundary amendment. And if you get a land use district boundary amendment, you need to go to the Land Use Commission. And what that involves is a lot of community input and an opportunity to provide information to the decision maker. And then the Land Use Commission decides whether or not they're going to approve it. And so if they're exempt from that process, what does that mean? That means we have less opportunity to talk about why these places should be maintained into agriculture or conservation. And this and the Land Use Commission decisions is one effective enforcement mechanisms of protecting traditional and customary rights, for example. And so what's come out of some Land Use Commission decisions, Kapa'akai Oka'ina is a case that involved a resort going up in Ka'upu level, and so the Land Use Commission granted the developer the boundary amendment, and Hawaiian said, hey, you didn't even consider that there's a fish pond here and there's all these other resources, and how are people in this area going to be impacted? And so it went to the Hawaii Supreme Court, and the Hawaii Supreme Court said, hey, at a minimum, you need to identify what practices are happening here, what resources are here, how they would be impacted, and how you can mitigate those impacts. And so without going through that process, to me it's a little scary. So you know, I've been talking about the Public Land Development Corporation now for, I guess, 10 months actively, and a lot of questions have come from our community, and some of the questions that they've been asking is, can these projects be easier if it goes through the Public Land Development Corporation? And our response is probably. Ho'opili, highly controversial development in the Eva side, which would take currently cultivated agricultural lands and create new homes. Further build out on Maui towards Waikaku. Molokai, I mean, I don't think we need to talk about a specific project there because there are lots of controversial projects on Molokai. Turtle Bay, Hokuli'a, which was on Hawaii Island, which is an example of gentleman estates. Staten Island is a hot topic today because of what's going to happen there moving forward. Honokohau Harbor, these lands are actually the only lands the Public Land Development Corporation currently has the ability to do anything with. Honokohau Harbor, they were given the development rights over this area. Honokohau Harbor is next adjacent to lands owned by DHHL and lands of the Honokohau National Park. There has been, this was a hot topic not that many years ago when there were discussions to build a promenade, etc. in the area, and the community had come out in opposition. Mauna Kea telescopes, windmills, and you know, we had to throw in something for Kauai. They're always constantly dealing with new resorts and the controversies that that brings. So these are some of the questions our community is asking about. So for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs from the inception, so basically as soon as we began to understand what the PLDC was, our three primary concerns has been and continues to be the impact on Native Hawaiian traditional and customary practices and the resources we rely upon. The disposition of public lands, which is, you know, what Derek had spoke to, and OHA's share of the public land trust revenue, which which is constitutionally based, and this is what allows us to serve our beneficiaries and do the advocacy work that we do. So just kind of a summary of where the concerns have been discussed about the exemptions. I know our rural and local communities, which oftentimes are the most vulnerable and also most attractive for new resorts and homes. Hawaii's fragile environment, again, Native Hawaiian traditional and customary practices, public health and safety, so this has gotten people that we don't normally align with involved because they're worried about their workers' rights, etc. And so these are some of the options being discussed in the community. You know, you can YouTube the most recent Public Land Development Corporation public hearings. They've won Molokai last night, last week they were in Hilo, Kona, and Maui. Tomorrow they'll be in Honolulu, and on Friday they'll be on Kauai. And so this is something being echoed at those meetings. We also are going to continue considering legislative amendments. The Office of Hawaiian Affairs included in our legislative package last year, an amendment that would have eliminated some of the most concerning exemptions. It would have required additional board members, including those who could assist with identifying culturally sensitive projects and requiring project plans, which currently is not required in the statute. And so the last option that we've been looking at is administrative rules. So we've taken the position that if the Public Land Development Corporation is going to move forward, we want to try to incorporate protections and specific criteria so the board can make the best decisions that it can. And this is not exactly what a lot of people have been saying at the meetings, but we have to ensure that if it's going to move forward, that there'll be less impactful. And so that doesn't mean that we're ignoring the other two options. Last session, there were multiple repeal bills introduced, and I'm imagining with the more recent uproar that it will continue to be a hot topic of discussion at the legislature next year. And so because of the timing, our priority is the administrative rules. We want people to attend the public hearings and tell the PLDC staff that you want them to adopt specific criteria and provide real protections and enforceable protections for Native Hawaiian traditional and customary practices. You want to make sure that when they move forward on projects, there will be meaningful input before, during, and after the projects, and that there'll be an opportunity to be heard on the neighbor islands and in our rural communities. And we want to protect our workers. A lot of the blue-collar workers are Native Hawaiians. So while they may benefit from increased development, we obviously want to make sure that their safety is considered. We want the public land trust intact, and we want to know what exemptions they're thinking about applying to the projects. And so we hope that you guys will try to make the last 2 hearings. And if you cannot, no problem, because you can always submit written testimony to this address. We have on the side table OHA's PowerPoint presentation that's been used internally and externally to help educate people. It includes most of the slides here. We have sample draft testimony there, so if you want to just cut and paste the language and put your own MANOA into that, there's information back there. There's a white paper also, which has more technical information about the statute, and flyers about the hearings. And then, so last but certainly not least, what can you do? I want everybody to leave here feeling as if they can do something. And so, foremost, as you noted, 3 of the 5 individuals sitting on the board are appointed by the governor. We elect the governor. And so we think it's important for you to vote. The legislators who represent you at the legislature are voted in. So we think that's critical. You know, I understand that some people choose not to vote because they don't want to participate in the system. And I respect that immensely. Oftentimes vote begrudgingly. But the fact is that these people have real lasting impacts on what's happening in our community. And so to me, the best thing that you can do the easiest thing you can do is to vote. And we have voter registration forms in the corner. We're giving out free t-shirts if you decide to register today as a part of our Manai Kaleo initiative, Hawaiian Voice, Hawaiian Vote initiative at OHA. We think you should be contacting your legislators. They are definitely paying attention to what's going on at the public hearings, and participate coming next session. Again, attend the hearings, submit written testimony, and continue to educate and inform yourself about what's going on here, and then tell your friends and family.
I'm going to cheat and borrow some of her slides, and then I'm going to jump into my own slides after that. So aloha mai kako. I'll talk real quick. But I'm going to try to break it down into layman's terms in a sense for us, and Derek and Jocelyn gave us a fantabulous context for understanding the PLDC and some of the roles within state and federal government related to this land base. And I like this slide when Jocelyn was doing it because I don't disagree with these. And in fact, I believe that we need to find ways to make these lands bring wealth to our community again, because they're important and we should be utilized. We need jobs for our community. We need revenue generations, whether it's this office or some administration. We need some administration that's going to malama this place, make sure that people aren't stealing imu stones from Yao Valley and shipping them to Oahu. So those things need to happen. I don't doubt that. But try to think about it like so we need something. We need a new vessel. We need a new vessel that's going to take us someplace. So we're buying a car. Right? We're buying a car that's going to take us someplace. And I need a new car right now. I can't afford a new car, so I'm going to buy a used car. And what's the first thing that we do nowadays when we buy a used car? Check the mileage.
Carfax.
Carfax. Show me the Carfax. Right? Show me the Carfax. And what does the Carfax do? It tells us where this car came from, how did it originate, was it defective when it came out of the factory in 1912 or whenever it was purchased or built, right? So that's what we got to do with these lands. We got to check the Carfax, right? We want to know, how did these lands come into place? What are the conditions with which they are now in control by this group? And what are the stipulations around it? So if we're going to check the Carfax on this land base, actually when these lands were formalized and then began to take on forms of private property were as early as 1840 in the Hawaiian Kingdom. And this is straight out of the Kingdom Constitution, and it basically says, "Ea ke ano kanoa ana ma onali'i ami ko opono ana I aina kamemea ikahi oino ke po'o ki aupuni nonono na aina apau mai hawa I anihau a ole nae nona pono I nona kanaka no ami nali'i a o kamemea ko lako po'o nana e oleo I ka aina." So the translation for us that cannot read Hawaii is, the origin of the present system of government and system of polity is as follows. Kamehameha I was the founder of the kingdom, and to him belonged all the land from one end of the islands to the other. This is the important part. Though it was not his own private property, it belonged to the chiefs and people in common, of whom Kamehameha I was the head and had management of the landed property. So very early on, this land base that we now call the public lands, it's a misnomer. There are no public lands. There's the crown and government lands. After the overthrow, they renamed them, called them public lands. But if somebody takes your house and they change the name from, you know, Kauanoi's Hale to it's everyone's house, doesn't change that chain of title and that transaction. So this is how it originated. And what this Constitution did was it formally established constitutionally vested rights of 3 classes in all, literally all the aina, that includes the kai, for all of Hawaii, one end to the other, by the mo'i, the ali'i, and the makainana. So it actually established a tenure system that was somewhat socialistic, if we think about it in that sense. 3 classes own everything. And then what they did was they figured out, okay, how do we deal with these 3 classes that jointly own everything? And Kalamai, the fonts are weird, but this is supposed to be in this layer. There's 3 layers, yeah? So here's our pie. And instead of little pieces of the pie, each of these guys own 1/3 of that entire pie. So no matter what you cut out, you can have interest inside. Does that make sense? Yes? Cool. So what the Mahele did was it set out to divide out the interests of the mo'i and the ali'i. The good thing about this is the ali'i were a finite amount of people. You could actually count them in this time. And they did that. And they did that in the Book of Mahele. The mo'i is going to be one person that represents the government. However, the makainana or the ho'aina, those guys are infinite. They're going to be an infinite class. Because every time a new Hawaiian is born, Noi has a new keiki, we have a new ho'aina that has an interest in this land tenure system. So that's what they did. Here's a copy of Buki Mahele so you guys can see it for yourself. They went out and they divided these lands and they said, here's Ko Kamehameha III, here's everything that goes to Kamehameha III. And here's, on this side, Ko Pi'anai'a, it's actually a family, I think, Ko Anikamila. And they give off, Kamehameha takes a portion and the ali'i take a portion. Okay, does that make sense? They're taking out that first 2 interests, yeah, that I talked to you about. The Constitution gives 3. Now the 2 are divided out. And I can get into very much detail, but here's an example of one of those awards. It goes to Alika Mila. He makes his claims. He gets a certain type of tenure and landhold. But there's this really important clause here. Aka koe nae na kuleana o na kanaka maloko. So Alikamila now gets his lands, Kauikeoli gets his lands, but remember there was one class that was remaining, the Makainana. So koe nae ke kuleana o na kanaka. But we're reserving those rights for the Ho'aina, for the Makainana, in this deed, in this original certificate of title to this land. So you go out, you get a survey, eventually he gets a fee simple title, and the same clause is still on that title. Koe nae ke kuleana o na kanaka maloko. So even fee simply held title in the Hawaiian Kingdom is different than we think about fee simple title in the US or in London, or wherever you may be. There's a specific clause even on fee simple title, allodial title, there's a clause that says, but it's subject to the rights of these people. So it's with this document then, in the Bukit Mahele, that they create what we're now calling the public lands. Okay? Everything that goes to Kamehameha III, everything that goes to the Aupuni, these eventually get to become called the Crown lands, and these eventually become called the government lands. Roughly, what we're looking at after the Bahele was, these are rough numbers. We've got to go back and look at them, and that's something that we're going to be working on soon. Roughly 2.5 million acres went to the Mo'i, 1.5 million to the Ali'i. This percentage of land holdings makes up now, could be the Lunililo Trust, could be Kamehameha Schools, Bishop Estate Trust, large landholders like that. The Mo'i then awarded out lands for himself, and he took roughly 1.1 million acres. Those became called the Crown lands eventually, and then he gave 1.5 million to the government. But this is the wild thing, is that all of these lands still remain subject koe nae ke kuleana o na kanaka. Does that make sense? So, when we're thinking about the so-called public lands, and again, it was a completely misnomer, and it worked because it made us think that it was public. Public. Everybody owns it. It's a public right. But actually, no, these were not public lands. And what we got to look at is what was the relationship between this koe nae ke kuleana o na kanaka and the land tenure system that was in place prior to 1893. And it's really, really important, because if we think about, I don't know, if we were just to throw out numbers, roughly 1/3 of this interest, what's the value of all the property in Hawaii right now? Is it 5 billion? Is it 10? What's 1/3 of that? It's a really big number. That's all. It's a really big number. And we're checking the Carfax, right? So that's what we went back. We went back, we saw, okay, how was this car created? What were the conditions in which it was built? And it was stipulated out in those tenures. Now, you can't change the car from when it was created to all of a sudden it morphs into a new car. You don't turn a Prius into a Lexus, right? And so when we're thinking about these lands, that's what we've got to remember, is what's the origin of title, and what were the conditions of the title at the time that it originated. So we can talk about how we're going to use the car, why we need it, but let's look at the origin of it, and you're going to find that, again, we do need to make these lands profitable again. We do need to create way for our community, but this isn't the vehicle to do it.
Well, we have a good half hour now for a lively discussion, questions. Can we start? Who's going to open it up for questions?
You mentioned, but a clarification, if this public land development corporation cannot touch the land controlled by DLNR, what's the issue?
They cannot obtain ownership over the lands owned by the Department of Land and Natural Resources as last year. I'm pretty sure that's the language says. But they can obtain development rights over it as defined by the statute. And so they can have public-private partnerships, developments, projects on the land.
So it is not a loss of land ownership for DLNR, just a project.
For the DLNR lands, yes.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that there were discussions this session about taking that language out, the limitation out of the statute. And they're also not subject to 171, the definition of public lands in 171, which has limitation, it sets out a framework by which the state can lease land, license, etc. And so the purpose of those provisions are to maintain the public's assets. And so if they're able to encumber the lands for 200 years, what does that do to the value? And when Hawaiians sit down at the table, what does that mean for those lands that we cannot choose how to use?
I have the feeling that what is really important is to put all the energy to repeal this bad law. I think tinkering with the rules might be good for you guys, lawyer, but it's going to be a lost cause. Then I have a comment for the political sciences students. I have the feeling that what goes on now in Hawaii is really conceptually wrong. We have, for example, DLNR that now is entrusted to make money out of conservation land. Government is set up with agencies with different competing mandates. So one is in charge of health, money, environment, education. So it is a better business to come up with revenue. It's not the DLNR business to come up with a project that pencil out. This is a private sector philosophy. A private business should pencil out revenue and cost. But a government agency should not. So DLNR should be just in charge of protect the forest, the water, and the conservation land. Instead, we have, strangely, a Hawaiian director that is pushing project on Sand Island that have to pencil out and so build the marinas for whoever can afford it. It's totally wrong. So this is contextual because it affects probably the creation of this bill. And it's just amazing that a democratic administration is pushing a private notions of how to run government. So I hope the political science students really look at this. It's really very, very bad. That's why this project that pencil out should be stopped. These things should be abolished and just go back to sustainability, economic development that is not this. Thank you.
The comments that have been provided at the first 4 hearings, echo what you said. People are demanding a repeal of the statute. So, I think a lot of people are on the same page as you. What we've decided, whether or not the PLDC gets repealed is going to depend on what the legislature is willing to do. And so in the meantime, we feel like instead of people having to sue every time they want to enforce the law, like the Constitution, for example, if it's going to move forward, we want them to ensure there's enforcement in the rules. But I totally understand what you're saying.
I'm skeptical that even with the improvements that you propose on the rules, they will do things well. The climate here in Hawaii is tragic, with the planners that are doing very bad planning, and the only one that are holding a little bit is the Supreme Court, who are not planners. What is going on is just incredible. Please study this, you political science.
Jim?
Good, yeah. Coming out of the same kind of disciplinary tradition, I'll offer the counterpoint. It seems to me that there's a couple of issues here that I think you pointed out are really just unclear. And not necessarily that it shouldn't be done or should be done, but just that we don't know what's going to be done. And that's what the concern is. And the two of them are, in my mind, is the mandate itself, what's the problem it's trying to solve? Right? So, for example, you have plenty of government entities that have very long histories that have been set up for development, right? So the National Forest Service. It's not to protect land, it's to use land to promote national kind of wealth, right? So a lot of that was forestry operations. You know, on top of that was sort of supposed to be, you know, sustainable forestry operations and conservation of, you know, some degree of biodiversity and all that kind of stuff. But it was a productive entity, which was different from the National Park Service, right? Similarly, you have the Hawaii Community Development Authority, right? It's kind of set up to engage the private sector to finance certain types of development. Similarly, it has a kind of public mandate. It's not just kind of to build condos and, you know, and sell them off to the private sector. It has certain kinds of things of maintaining an open waterfront. It has certain things about affordable housing criteria, da-da-da-da. So there are examples in which the government is sort of set up to engage private finance for certain types of issues. To me, the question is, with the Forest Service, it's basically to maximize the productive use of forestry resources to go into the tax base, right? And to finance all sorts of things that we would probably agree with. With the Hawaii Community Development Authority, it's to kind of create more economic activity and kind of walkable streets and you know, sort of dense urban neighborhood development in that area of Kaka'akum, right? And then they have a place out in Kalaeloa, which is, you know, they're targeting for kind of net zero communities. Right, and those are kind of, you know, you may dispute whether you like that public objective, but it is sort of set up in a way that's fundamentally different from a private sector objective of making profit, right? So the question is, the unclarity on that side is really, what's the point of the PLDC, right? Yes, we need jobs, we need tax revenues, all that kind of stuff. Nobody would disagree with that. But what is the specific resource, rather than just land itself, that is being mobilized by creating that partnership, right? I mean, land is used for lots of things. It's used for farming, it's used for housing, it's used for commercial development, it's used for conservation, some of which have good returns, some of which have had, you know, bad returns. What's the sort of mandate? And then related to that is, what are the kinds of projects? I mean, so far it sounds like there's a specific thing about harbor management, but what are the other kinds of specific projects that it was set up to kind of promote? Right? Is it forestry? Is it kind of space for, you know, some kind of transportation, you know, access? Is it space for, you know, cell phone towers? Is it space for whatever? It seems to make a big difference what those proposed uses are, and narrowing those down into something that is easier to get a handle on about what its implications are for that public good. And to me, that's the real kind of unclarity.
Its powers are so broad that you're right, it doesn't articulate what kinds of projects they can do. It seems like they can do nearly any kind of project. I mean, if you just read the statute, they give specific examples like parks and hotels and etc. I'm not clear you would want one state agency who would have that expertise in all these different areas.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, I mean, point is well taken. What is the real purpose of it? I don't think anybody really knows. But so point well taken. And on top of the fact that there is a big problem with the Carfax report on these particular sets of lands, let's try to make revenues in other places until we can resolve those issues. And I think Derek quoted directly from even the U.S. Supreme Court that's hinting in that sense. So that to me, that's a very, very huge issue that's going to affect generations to come.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of to add to that. If you look at the legislation, it doesn't say exactly what the plans are, but it does make a point, for whatever reason, to articulate that they are allowed to do the following, not limited to, but including hotel, resort, timeshares, parking lots, fueling stations, and seawater energy. So there's obviously some real specific interest already behind the scenes there, and it's important enough for them to articulate that in the legislation, if that doesn't hint towards something. But, you know, I appreciate that OHA is bringing out these particular concerns, these specific concerns, and kind of like illuminating some of the specific problems with this. But, you know, as far as preparing to go to the hearing tomorrow, I agree with you that I think that, you know, we need to think about organizing to repeal this legislation. And I think that when we testify that that is what needs to happen, that does speak to those more specific points. But if we just speak to those specific points do not speak to the protection of those lands until the claims of Native Hawaiians are resolved or whatever, are addressed. So I also think it's important for us to keep in mind that it's going to be live streamed tomorrow, is that right?
Well, I heard Olelo is.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's going to be, Olelo's going to bring all the equipment and it's going to be broadcast live on Olelo. I don't know about the live stream to the internet, but I take it will be.
So live,
Doug will be there.
I'll be walking around taking on the street in hallway interviews, testimony that you can't get inside.
So it's also important to consider, those of us who are planning to go tomorrow, that what we're saying is not going to only be heard, you know, by those at the table, but by a lot of the community that's paying attention to this. So we should think carefully about what is that big message that we want to get out there to the community as much as we want to these guys. Because, yeah, all these processes might make all of these development projects harder, or the PLDC might make things like ho'opili and stuff like that a little bit easier, but it doesn't stop them. That's kind of the problem. You know, it just, those processes, you know, allow us a little bit more time to organize around each kind of individual development thing that we might have problems with. But this land just needs to be protected.
I don't think what you're saying is inconsistent with what we're saying. I think they go hand in hand. And so, absolutely, if you feel like that's you know, something that needs to be said, I mean, I think that's important for you to make your voice heard and encourage others to do the same. In terms of what you said at the end, you know, to some extent you're right that some of these processes don't necessarily stop projects, but I think sometimes they do stop projects, particularly when they would have significant impacts. And even for those projects that they don't stop, they ensure that, for example, fish ponds are getting filled in, or you know, that there's sufficient access for people that want to fish on the shoreline where the hotel is. And so while that may not be the best case scenario in some instances, I think it's critical for the perpetuation of our culture, particularly in our rural communities. And I believe in some instances it has stopped certain projects.
But isn't, sorry to cut you off, but isn't the part of the goal to stop, you know, bad projects and promote good projects, right? So what if those fish ponds were actually kind of created and developed and, you know, sort of diversified, and they employed lots of people that were otherwise unemployed? Presumably that would be something that you would want to kind of have PLDC kind of engage in and kind of think clearly about and work with OHA and other institutions about making that something that generates tax revenues, generates jobs, and da-da-da. And I mean, that's like, you know, that's your best of all possible worlds kind of scenario. But it does seem like the question is not how do you stop projects, but how do you actually kind of both stop projects that you don't like and create projects that you do like.
But the litany of projects, this litany
right, no, I think that's
a conventional project.
Yeah.
And the purpose is actually very clear if you reported correctly here, that is the development arm for the LNR. So the development arm for the agency in charge of conservation land. Don't make any sense, because we have the urban zoning, the agricultural zoning, and this conservation, so should not be developed conservation.
But it's not the conservation department, it's development of the land and natural resources.
DLNR is the administrator only of conservation land, and there's a subzone with different degree of
development rights.
Of control.
Yeah.
So it is totally don't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, could be multiple ways of managing these resources, and you look at what Kamehameha schools did in sort of diversifying how they measure their returns. There's cultural returns, there's community returns, there's economic, there's environment, and I mean, even if we're thinking about the practicalities, I mean, this is more how we're going to drive the car. I'm saying there's a problem with the car in general, but even on that sense, we could think about how these lands could be used for more diverse ways to engage community. But none of that's happening. It's still that economic driver that's pushing the whole thing. But I want to hear from the students, because professors are dominating the dialogue.
Thanks for your presentations. You're all really awesome. And I think that there's really no mystery that it was economic forces driving it from the very beginning. I think that to me seems pretty clear. But my question is, have you been following, or do you know much about the history of Donovan, De La Cruz, and Juan Sullivan, who proposed this legislation? And
the Carfax. The Carfax on the legislation itself.
Yeah. I think I'm interested to know like what sorts of labor organizations or unions have been mobilizing to support. Who are the major funders, or some things that I've been wondering about in terms of putting them into office, and who stands to profit in the end from PLDC?
Yeah, for me, I could talk a little bit about that. My preference is to maybe talk about it after the Congress.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think there was a recent, there's been a couple recent articles on Civil Beat about some of their supporters. I think Senator Solomon, the discussion about Senator Solomon was related to the election.
Well, I mean, it seems also I'm studying resistance to capitalism on Molokai, and it seems to me like that's the sort of the way people think about development these days is this very neoliberal, they're going to develop it for profit. They're not going, any development is going to be that kind of profit-oriented, and that the private corporation has more power than the public, the government agency that's supposed to be looking for the public good. I mean, I think that's a general feeling in the community. That's why there's pushback, but whether we have the power to stop it, that's the big question, right?
Yeah, I'm not from the university, I'm from the community, which means I walked off the street. But, from the specific projects that are mentioned in the legislation, we can assume that there's already been at least some unofficial discussion between the people that have proposed the legislation and the people who plan to take advantage of the legislation. Now, who it is and that kind of stuff, who knows? My question is, I want to hear some discussion of, you mentioned remedies like repeal, imposition of stricter administrative rules and that sort of thing. My question is, I want to hear some suggestion as to the kinds of things that people in the community can do to effectively oppose the PLDC. Because a lot of times, we do things like we write our legislators and stuff like that, and that has varying degree of effectiveness in actually doing things. I'd like to hear some suggestions of the kinds of actions, things that the community can do.
This may sound fluffy because it's not as tangible, but I really think that voting is important. I mean, if you look at what happened in the primary in multiple races, there were at least 3 or 4 races where the winner was determined within 80 votes. Like 80 votes. So I really think that voting is important. I mean, what can you say about whether or not you feel like what you bring to what you tell your legislator is going to fall on deaf ears or not? You know what I mean? I would still encourage that you do it. You know, what Derek and Davis and I did just a few years ago, we thought there was no way that legislation was going to be passed, but we pounded the pavement and met with every single legislator. And while we ultimately did not get a moratorium, we got something better than nothing. Because what happens now is, even though the state can sell lands if the legislature decides to, OHA and the public gets notice about the fact that they're going to do it, so that we can review the parcel and try to get more information. And just last year, we were successful in moving forward a bill that would require additional information for us. And so to me, that's important, because if we want to make our voice heard, if we want to oppose that, you know, at this stage, at least we have an opportunity to do that, as opposed to them just, you know, doing transactions. So, you know, I'm not sure if that probably doesn't satisfy your question, but the fact is those are the decision makers, and we put them into office, and so we should hold them accountable. And the same goes with the corporation members. From Hui, get 10,000 people to storm the legislature. You know, it's happened before. Ilio Ulo Okalani was formed because there was legislation introduced that would have required Hawaiian practitioners to register in order to be recognized, and that bill died. So I think there's power when we unite and make our voice heard.
I can say I have a little bit of a less fluffy response, hopefully less fluffy. It's probably still fluffy nonetheless, but I think it's important for those people who really want to be active on this issue to assess the situation and break it down into short-term and long-term goals. So although going to the administrative hearing may not be or may not suit your ultimate goals, I think it needs to be part of a short-term strategy. And then the long-term strategy is actually going to the legislature and getting people mobilized to do that. It's going to require money. It's going to require a lot of resources and time. I mean, I gave my life during that period to doing that. I didn't take the bar exam when I was supposed to. For that purpose, it was probably, you know, I'm not sure if I would, you know, give that up, because it's, the bar exam probably isn't something that you should pass on. You should do it as soon as you can. But I mean, I gave my life to it. Yeah. But I think that's the way we have to look at it. You know, what's our ultimate goal? And if we can't get that, what's the closest we can get to that goal? But also, in looking at this issue, what are some of the other issues? I think a lot of us within the Hawaiian community were a little bit surprised when we started hearing that there were some labor unions that had legitimate concerns about it. A lot of times, I think, you know, I've got friends who work for labor unions, and they're excited about development because it means jobs. You know, but you've started to see a few more labor unions take a look at it. You know, this does provide jobs in the short term. But if partnerships with the PLDC allow for development of subdivisions that are not held to the construction standards, what does that mean for our unionized workers who are in these buildings? So I think it's an exciting time where we see labor unions, or at least some of them, kind of on the same side of Native Hawaiian issues and environmental issues. So look at those other issues, you know, look at some of the other concerns that come up. There's quite a few of them.
Another possible strategy is we need to become masters of our aina again. Not masters in the sense I master you, but masters of understanding our environment and that connection to place and to aina, and understanding how to steward it. Because I look at groups that are doing that have done that. You look at Ka'ala Farms, going out on land, engaging, providing jobs for the community. You look at Paipaiuhe'ia, these small, relatively small, but functioning and really important nonprofit community initiatives that are embedded on aina. And to the extent that we can get ahead of all this, right? So yeah, okay, one is the top-down approach, get the big investors in, bring in the private corporations. But what if we took the bottom-up approach and started to really know our aina and started to be better stewards of it than anybody else? That's another really powerful approach that you don't rely on legislators as much.
Yeah, and I think that that's truly the public way, or Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at too. The mistrust of the big corporations not being able to do it for the people, but doing it for profit, even though the statute says it's not for profit, you know? Was there somebody else back in here who had a question? Oh, yeah.
So if we're thinking about moving towards some kind of possibility of a repeal, I think one of the things is like an educational kind of move. And I think like this move with the students making signs tomorrow, showing up at the meeting tomorrow is really great. I think that's so important. I'm wondering if there's more of a widespread kind of move to educate the general public. Because I went to one of the PLDC meetings and there are 8 people in the audience. And as angry as people are about it, it's surprising how small the attendance is, that people don't know when the meetings are. And there's not as much of a public show of protest as you would think there would be. So I'm wondering if, because I know it has lots of money, you know, is there an investment in an educational kind of, you know, education about the PLDC? It's for all of the panel members. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very interesting.
You know, I agree with you. There have not been a lot of people at the PLDC meetings, the actual meetings, except for the last one, which they were talking about transferring development rights to the properties. So there was actually a bunch of people that showed up. You know, we've kind of focused on our education initiatives at this time, because there was something we felt like there was an action happening that people could actually do something about. And so we're hoping to continue this as we move forward. They haven't taken a position on anything at the meetings. There hasn't been anything on the agenda at the meetings that we felt that we needed to get people there for, but we've used this as an opportunity to educate. You know, as for moving forward, perhaps we can use the video, the footage, to do that. Something we'll definitely think about after we're done. We had a panel last year as well, but we've learned a lot about the PLDC since then. So I'm glad to hear that you think it's a good idea, and you know, we'll see what we can do moving forward.
Now, this video should clarify that this is a raid on conservation land. Already urban is ripe for development, rural is open for development, agricultural zone land now is open for development, now is the last one. So everything can be developed. And this bill is just to get to the conservation land. So it should be very clear, is the major point, aside from the cedar land.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I think there are people that are involved in it. John Osorio, when I was on the way here, he said a bunch of people are coming down and going to testify on it tomorrow. So I think that there are some people engaged. Surely it could be better, but I guess everybody's trying to survive right now. I think that's the hard part. But I mean, I think Manoa's right. What's the value of a forest? I mean, like for our rain system, for our water system, like, because we're only looking at an economic driver, you're not diversifying how you have returns, and what are the ecosystem services that are involved in that, and how is that important to all the communities, ceded lands, so-called ceded lands or not. That's really another important valid point.
I have like more of a comment than a question. I think like the chicken thing is like concern from laws, you know, and that's like a big thing. You see stuff with just like even internationally, like maps and stuff, how they take over natives and native lands and stuff like that, you know, how exempt portions of land from themselves too. And even just like locally, like in my own town, something like that. I mean, we're like in California, California, we're really big for strawberry growth, for producing strawberries for the rest of the nation, stuff like that. You know, one of the top contenders for that. They've practically like moved towards like, you know, building up more business and commercial and industry and putting more homes there too. It's great for like people to make some money. There's a lot of companies that come out like from different areas rather than the local place too to make the money. So you're bringing people in either from out of state or from other communities. like farther over or something like that in California. If they destroyed like a lot of the farmland that that was open for us there too, to put in a lot of businesses. The city council also they made some deals with some businesses, kind of like I guess kind of like the public-private ownership thing in a sense, where they built like a really expensive movie theater with like a big old plaza and this and that, and they promised the movie theater if they would build and they went out of business that the city would go ahead and take over the building, and this would cost us money, ultimately. Luckily, it's been going good so far. Like just being one of the top 10 business-friendly cities in California, it gave up its farmland to do that, and therefore, we're just not, we're not where we should be agriculturally back then. We had one of the best, topsoils around, because it used to be marshland too, kind of like sand and everything like that right next to the beach. They destroyed that, pretty bad. Just for those aspects, it's pretty, that trips me out too. And plus, like I said earlier, a business is there to make profit. It's law that they're supposed to make profit, I mean, they can't just kind of be just getting by you're not supposed to be just, well, anyways, it's just, the laws for profit, so it's a trip too. And then you look at the culture versus profit aspect, where they tend to go towards more of the profit of the culture, and they say they're going to be responsible, for building up responsible cultural things and whatnot, like I said, you have on the slide. But it's it seems that they're going to consider profit over culture ultimately. So you take those things into consideration, and just look at my own hometown, how they destroyed all our culture, because since in Southern California, a lot of Mexicanos come up from down south to come and work in the fields and stuff like that, or just even local ones right there. So it takes their jobs away, what's already right there. And on top of that, they take away these farmlands, whether it's the farm is privately owned, they sell it to a developer or whatnot. Well, they're making these new homes that are too expensive for the average person who lives there. So they're kind of pushing out the person and bringing in new people. So whether it's development, this and that, it's well, who are they really intending to during their development as well? So I just wanted to put that out.
Thank you guys for the presentation. I have two questions. The first was considering from the viewpoint of the three classes, what do you think the best action for Native Hawaiians to take upon this matter as far as their vested interest is concerned with those reserved rights for Native tenants? There's been a lot of different, I guess, yes, so that was my first question.
Yeah. I can't tell you what the best action is. I mean, I think you've got to kind of figure out where you fit in and how you can be involved. But for me, my role that I see right now is trying to get people to really understand the depth of that koina ikikuliana, and that it's not, now it's kind of looked at as an important decision with cash and gathering rights and access, really important stuff. Glad we have them. But actually that clause is a vested right to Aina itself. It's not to come grab a few things. It's actually for a land base, for a people. And so educating ourselves and understanding that, the nuances of it, being able to offer that argument, and then eventually creating publications and networks of people where it can filter its way to the powers that be, so that we can really look at and reinterpret this. But I mean, what is really powerful and motivating to me is, again, we don't need federal recognition. Whether or not you're into independence and occupation, that's awesome, whatever. Royal Commission, cool. But what is the clauses on the titles to our land in all of Hawaii, regardless of whatever government we have here right now? I mean, what's the Carfax say? And so it's really powerful and important for me to try to help other people understand about it.
And then for my second question, I guess this will be for everyone. Given the fact that those last vested interests is so aggregated today, say for instance you got agencies such as OHA, where a major portion of Hawaiians are beneficiaries of. You have the legislative process where they exercise their right to vote and whatnot. how do you, I guess, what would be the point for, I guess, how can Native Hawaiians best address their vested interests through these agencies, like the legislative process or OHA, and not have it misrepresented and such, as those agencies come from a particular system or structure. How could that work, so to say?
Yeah. Well, I think we're on a path to doing that. Though you're right, vested rights, thinking about Koina and Kikuliana, it's opened up some more opportunities, and I don't know what OHA's position is on it, but eventually there may be more opportunities for partnerships in those areas, and that means I can't speak for OHA. We didn't plan this, have this conversation previously, so I know what it's like to work for a bureaucratic organization, so I just want to put that out there. But this is tremendously important, right? If the so-called ceded lands, the Crown and the government lands, if we're talking about 1.2 million acres, 1.8 million acres, Kamehameha Schools is 360,000 acres. So at a minimum, it's probably 3 times what Kamehameha Schools owns right now that we're talking about. So the impacts are pretty heavy, and I hope that as we move further along, we understand the car facts, know what the car is. Now as we're going forward, there'll be more opportunities to re-engage in that conversation, if that makes sense.
I have a response to both your questions, but I just want to find out exactly, because I thought the flyer said 1:30, but how much time actually do we have?
Well, we do have to get ready for our class, so.
And that starts at what time?
1:30.
Okay. So I'll make this really quick. Can you rephrase your first sentence again? Can you ask that first question again?
On as far as the vested interests.
No, the first question.
And the actions they should take.
Okay, actions you can take. So, just really,
this exercise.
I think in response to your question, I think we need to kind of separate the objective from the strategy. How important is the strategy that you or anybody else might want to take to accomplish that certain objective? So you need to identify what your actual objective is. At the end of the day, at the end of this battle, what exactly do you want? And then figure out among with yourself personally or with whatever who you're working with, what are the values you're going to use or conform to in order to do that. I think a lot of people in our community get so focused on the strategy rather than the result. And once we start doing that, we kind of start branching off into other things. From a Hawaiian perspective, there may be other things there may be other ways of strategizing that aren't necessarily culturally Hawaiian, but they're not inconsistent with our cultural values. In response to your second question, I think we're at a very critical time right now, where if we start developing more literature on these Hawaiian issues and start narrowly shaping public opinion and the discourse on these issues, that when we try to advocate in various venues, that we have a body of literature to refer decision makers and lawmakers to take a look at, so that we can hopefully change what people think and how they think about certain issues. We try to do this at the law school. I think if we can get more people who are interested in these issues into graduate studies. What I do at the law school is I often try to recruit. I talked with you about this in June, trying to get you into law school. But that's one of the things that we do. We try to get more Native Hawaiians into law school. I've talked with Arlene about this a couple of years ago also. And try to get them working in other places where they can shape people's understandings. When you look at some of the more recent Supreme Court cases, state Supreme Court cases, it's interesting. I mean, super ferry. Yeah, the court said you can't simply just waive these environmental protection laws. Same thing with Nava'iha. The court says you can't, take this and not look at this. And then more recently with the rail issue, there's a real emphasis on protecting traditional and customary rights. But how do we end up in a position where these governmental agencies, I don't think they're intentionally for Hawaiian purposes trying to disregard these laws, but we need to develop that body of literature.
I'll just take half the time directed. So, I agree with what Derek said. I think it's important to understand that a lot of us have the same long-term end goals. We may have different paths on how we're going to get there, but I think if we start focusing on how much we actually have in common, and when I say we, I guess I'm talking about the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, people at the law school, the people at the poli-sci department, whatever. I think if we start focusing on what we have in common, rather than focusing on how we differ, I think we'll be a powerful force to be reckoned with. Kamana is so in demand because there aren't a lot of people with the background that he has. So I would encourage people that are like you, that are interested in what he was saying, to become an expert too. Because the fact is that when Derek and I, and when OHA participated in trying to get the state to not sell these lands, well, that was just one part of the big process, right? So we were saying, you cannot sell these lands until we sit down at the table and figure out how we're going to resolve this issue. How are we going to resolve the issue, Just because, I'm sure Kamana is going to be somebody that we're going to be talking to once we decide to sit down at the table. And so while, we decided to participate in the current process that has real effects on our lands, it doesn't mean we're not taking into consideration with what Kamana is saying and other people in our community who are becoming experts in this area. And we're going to need them, when we sit down. As everyone knows, we have a new administrator at OHA. It's an exciting time to be working at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And so I think we're moving in a positive direction, and Derek's right, it's a critical juncture. Let's start talking about what we agree on and where we actually want to go. Because I think we all want a healthy, vibrant Native Hawaiian community.
So, with that, on that note, hopefully we will revisit this again at some point. I think that it's an important thing for our department to keep on top of in political science. So, to be continued.
Please, take the floor.
There's handouts, and then we might have a brief announcement about tomorrow.
Yeah, what Candace touched on is tomorrow at Native Hawaiian Student Services in QL 104 from 12:30 to 1:30. We're going to have a student discussion on this. That's going to kind of start with the Carfax thing, and then move through to talking about why these lands are important for our future.
And Olelo will stream it live on the internet. They do that for all their channels. So olelo.net off of Olelo.
Yeah.